So does living near a nuclear plant increase your risk of getting cancer? You may have noticed in the news lately that there is this new study out from Harvard studying Massachusetts nuclear plants and concluding that there was a 4.1 to 3.5 increased chance of getting cancer for people living within 30 kilometers of a nuclear plant. So let me introduce myself. I am DJ. I'm a radiation health physicist. And when you see things like this in the news, it might scare you because you know right now we're kind of going through a revolution of increased nuclear power. So let's dig into this a little deeper. So these types of studies have been coming out for decades, and there's three main points that I usually look for. So quite often these studies use the proximity to a nuclear plant, how close do you live to it, in their calculations, instead of modeling out what would be the actual dose of radiation to those populations. So if you lived maybe on the opposite side of where prevailing winds blow, you would be getting less radiation dose than the people downwind, but you would still be included as being one of those close-in populations. And you can actually see it right here in that Harvard study. It talks about the fact that they didn't use dosimetry. They used proximity to make their calculation. And what happens very often is a study will come out like this showing a higher correlation to people living near a nuclear plant with cancer. Another study comes in afterwards, actually does the radiation dose monitoring and determines there really isn't any correlation. For my second point, when it comes to some of these follow-up studies, what they do is they look at nuclear sites where they planned on building a nuclear plant, or maybe they actually did build a nuclear plant, but they never started up, so there was never any radiation dose. And when they compare the populations of people living near nuclear plants that are running to these sites that never had a nuclear plant started up, the correlation just disappears completely, because it has something to do with these locations that they decide to build these nuclear plants. It's usually lower population, farther away from the major cities. They're not quite sure exactly why these sites have increased cancer clusters. And the third major point here when it comes to epidemiological studies is you need to look at the plausibility of the results that you're looking at. It doesn't make sense that you see about a 3 to 4% increase in your cancer rates. In order to see this percentage of increase of risk of cancer, you would need to get 10 to 50 millisieverts of dose. And they diligently measure the radiation dose to people living near nuclear plants, and it's typically like 0.01 millisievert. So the plausibility that the radiation from the nuclear plant was to cause this level of increased risk just isn't there. It's really not possible. So sure, it's an interesting study, but you should take it with a grain of salt and wait for the follow-up studies.